Alright, pretty much just a comment video, but we'll see if I have other stuff to add. Been working on the settings in Linux, trying to get some sort of better frame rate than this. It's just horrible. I'm not having any luck. So, might have to use the old computer so to do videos, which is annoying, but anyway. Other issues. Yeah, well, I'll do a video on that subject. Separate Linux video, I guess. So anyway, comments. So people did the Christmas thing. Very nice. Thank you. Blah, blah, blah. Alright, so I don't know if I read this, but we'll read it again. It went through both holes at the same time and then interfered with itself. Yes, that's their theory. And it also goes, maybe I'll play some of the rational science guy, because he does a little spiel on the two-slit experiment, and also explains the history, that there was nothing remarkable about the Young experiment because this had already been dealt with in Newton's day, particularly the single impediment part, and the Huygens theory of that, the idea that the photon is as wide as anything you put in front of it, essentially. And that somehow breaks into two round waves or something, when there's no slits. The part doesn't make much sense. And you have to explain all of these phenomenon. And then there's also that, can't remember the name of it, Lloyd mirror thing also. It creates the same pattern with a mirror, and it just doesn't make, the theory doesn't make much sense of this wave interference. When you can have one of the paths is an illusionary path created by a mirror. That doesn't make much sense. Alright, Aristotle came up with the law of non-contradiction in the 4th century BC. One cannot say something that it is and that it is not at the same time. Yes, obviously there's no logic to paradox, and it has to be resolved. Alright, so modular forms. So he typed some comments to somebody else's comments, and then I guess he deleted them. So he deletes his own comments, which, anyway, whatever. So he says, wow, you deleted the other comment that had the argument about the laser. So again, this crap that I have somehow evaded your garbage is just nonsense. I asked you to post links. I ask you to in some way point out how there's something that proves me wrong, and you don't do any of that crap. And you don't do it even when you do attempt it. You can't even do the minimum of treating me with a tiny bit of respect on my own channel. Like I said, why should I take your abuse in a comment? There's no reason for me to tolerate that. I have too much self-respect to sit there and say, yes, you can treat me like shit when you have no right to. I don't know who the fuck you are, you anonymous coward. So why don't you quit being an anonymous coward? Make a video, do something of some kind of substance, except making these raggy statements that I claim are false, inaccurate, untrue. So, you're going to have to rewrite your text. Alright, because when you assert something that I know to be false, I don't have any reason to accept that. Why should I let you lie on my comment section? Why should I allow somebody to lie? And they're fucking lies. Alright, and you didn't even reply to it this time. Reply to what? And what do you mean? Reply to the same remark you make over and over and over again? I've already gone over why I don't do the laser experiment, if that's what you're talking about. But I don't even know what you're talking about. There's lots of statements I've made about lasers. So it's just such crap. So much for answering everything. So again, you're claiming I didn't respond to something, and I'm saying no, that's a lie. You can't lie here. So I'm not going to accept it. Okay? And you can call me a despicable coward again. You have no evidence of this cowardice. None. I have no reason to accept you lying. Okay, and that's just a fucking lie. So, fuck you. You're done here. All right, you won't be done. I'll just delete it because I want to know what your other comments were, because I know they're crap. You know, I read one. You asserted something about how, in my theory, somehow electrons would smash together or something because they're attracted to protons or something. I've already explained how the two forces work, so that's just, and again, an assertion you're making that I've demonstrated repeatedly how it's not true. So why should I accept that? Alright, so first Last says, the video you are playing is echoing badly. Duh. You know, I don't know. I mean, okay, fine, you can say something like this. Like, everybody could hear that. So clearly, everybody else doesn't need to know it. And I put in the title of the video the word echo just to make kind of a joke out of it. You know, because the video has an echo. I was aware of it. There's nothing I can do about it. The video was already made. I can't take the echo out, asshole. I mean, you don't understand that I couldn't just remove the echo? Yeah, well, I just can't remove the echo. And I wasn't going to redo the fucking video. You know, just so you think this is useful commenting. Okay, thank you. No, fuck you. You know, I mean, it's just... Jesus. The shit you people give a shit about is amazing. Alright, so Grand Pied. Closest example to physicists working together, maybe perhaps Emile de Clarinet and Voltaire. Mistresses don't count. Fathers don't count. Brothers don't count. So what's the point of saying something like that? Though Voltaire was thought of primarily as a philosopher back in those days, scientists pretty much fell beneath the category of philosopher in science philosophy, similar to astronomy and astrology. Yeah, well, whatever. They were all, you know, legitimate scientists and such. I'm just saying that, you know, you can't use examples of working together when, you know, people are that close, so to speak. So. Legitimate enough comment, but again, you know, why not just concur with the point that yes, in the history of science, the vast majority of the people who make substantial contributions didn't do so through collaboration. I mean, I'm all for it if you can do it. I'm just saying that logically it doesn't make much sense for, you know, two intelligent minds to somehow be able to agree enough, okay, for there to be a consensus in the process of making something. It's just too, it's too, yeah, I don't know how to, you know, it never works. It's just like, I don't know what kind of examples to make, but you know, it's like too many hands baking a cake or something. They have cliches for that kind of stuff. It just doesn't work. All right, you already have a model that works. Nobody's been able to pick it apart. Well, not with anything rational. Technically, you've interacted with loads of people and exposed to loads of information too. It's not like you're shut away from the world working in isolation. Quite the opposite. Well, yeah, exactly. Isolation doesn't mean... I mean, the fact that the vision has to come to you, you have to see it. You know, it's always going to be personal. But yeah, you know, I'm like, again, I'm not against collaboration. I solicited collaboration. I mean, it'd be really nice to have a really, you know, a math guy, you know, to help out. But yeah, you can't do it. It's not practical. Side note, more suitable to an Amendum channel. You may be busy, but was curious about your take on the current state of the stock market and economic future. Yeah, well, I've been predicting the crash for 10 years, so obviously my I don't have much credibility. I've been predicting it for 15 years, really, because I didn't imagine the shenanigans they came up with, you know, to sustain the economy. So they did the Federal Reserve thing where they put a bunch of debt in the Federal Reserve accounts, okay, $4 trillion. and then they took another $5 to $7 trillion worth of bad junk bonds, and FDIC insured them with a $20 billion FDIC insurance fund. So 7 trillion insured by 20 billion. No chance that's going to work, right? So I mean, the very mechanisms that were created to prevent stock market crashes and runs on the bank is the very thing they've destroyed. So that's the joke of it. But the real crash won't happen until bankruptcies are allowed to happen. So that's what they've really done over the last 10 years, is the whole bankster kind of bullshit, is they really have prevented rich people from going bankrupt with gimmicks. And so as long as they keep hiding the bankruptcy, the economy will also be sustained, because it's really just rich people saying we're rich and we have money. And so when it's found out that they really don't own anything that's of any value, that all the paper is junk, and they start going bankrupt, that's when the real crash happens. So the stock market might go down, but it won't go down hard until the bankruptcies start. Once the bankruptcies start, that's when you know the game's over. Hyperinflation on the way. So anyway, enough of that. All right. So yeah, see, there's just nothing to, so little to comment on. So this was a curious comment, Matthew Owen. So he linked to not a very insightful video, actually. I don't know if I still have it loaded, but it's just an image of his own document, which, with crappy music, which I just absolutely hate. You can't read it, so it's like, what's the point? Oh, he has no, that's the other guy, has the, so I think the whole video is just an image of the document, which, again, it's just not. Alright, so what he was asserting, so you can probably see a little bit of it here. So this is a spinning magnet, and he put a wire against it. So the point is the spinning magnet is north-south on the plane sides. So these flat sides are the north side and the south side. And he was asserting that, well, this breaks whatever Faraday's law or some other law, because he's not gaining any voltage. Even though this magnet's spinning at a high speed, it's not collecting any voltage. Well, that's because to get the voltage out of a magnet, you have to engage the dipole. If the dipole is made invisible, nothing can happen. So if somebody sticks a magnet in a coil and then they just spin the magnet, nothing will happen. Spinning the magnet's useless. What you have to do is you have to move the dipole. The dipole has to be felt and moved. And if you're only moving the monopole part, the monopole is the only part your wire is seeing, is one pole of the magnet. No matter what you do, you can't change anything, because you never change the flux. You never change it from north to south. You have to change it. You have to allow the atoms to depressurize and pressurize to maintain a current. So you won't have any current if you just have a magnet with the magnet spinning, and it's not cutting the dipole field. You have to cut the dipole field. Cutting a monopole field will do absolutely nothing. So just throwing that in. It's nice. It seems to have kind of nice stuff. I mean, it's a 1 Tesla magnet, which is pretty impressive for one that thin. But anyway, so I read a little bit of it. There's an associated website, I think. So it's scienceforums.net. So we'll see how this goes, because they have a speculations category where apparently all the nutters can talk. And some of these, rational physics guys chime in. So this might be worth a place for me to post some shit. We'll see. It was real 0-point energy in combination with photons. I mean, it has all kinds of wacky shit in here, so there's some hope maybe. And such. Alright, so let's jump to the subscriptions. Let's just see while we're here if there's anything new. D. Hilster made his usual Friday video, but just crap. Never really got to any. He just so superficial in how he covers subjects, and so he's just re-harping that somehow all these people are wrong-headed because they're not doing it his way, which is basically just lie to other people. Say, oh yeah, I think your ideas are great, even though you don't think they're great, and you don't agree with them at all, and then just assert your shit. And again, keep us making bold assertions about, oh, the Earth was a soccer ball at one time, and it's making atoms, and it's making oil, and it's making water, and it's just crap. Somebody posted a bunch of horrible animal torture videos, quite awful. So here's the Bill Gatey thingy. So we'll play some of this, I guess. Let's see. Hopefully it's not the same boring beginnings. Speed it up a little, I think.
Okay, now I'm going to cover the slit experiment.
Yeah, the sound is really low.
I think it was Richard Feynman. He said, slit experiment is what defines quantum mechanics. Because that's the one that drove them nuts. They said, how does Mother Nature do this? And they couldn't figure it out. And they said, look, sometimes light behaves as a particle, sometimes as a wave. For some experiments, we have to use the wave. For others, we have to use the particle. And so they ended up with a political agreement. They said, look, all you wave theorists come over here, all the particle physicists come over here. Let's kiss and make up. And let's just call it a wave particle or a wave packet or whatever. And
yeah, well, it is all kind of silly. And I would argue that most of the evidence indicates it's a particle, in the sense that that was the whole point of quantum mechanics, was recognizing the fact that this was a corpuscle of energy, a clump, as Feynman would say. And there's very little evidence of this wave stuff, and it's only in these bizarre circumstances with the single and the double and the single impediment, the surface experiments. So I don't. This is what I mean by it. The evidence is so weak, and you can just use one logical statement and say, what do all those experiments have in common? The single slit, the double slit, and the single impediment. Oh, surfaces. That's what they all have in common, is surfaces. And proximity to surfaces. Light in proximity to surfaces. And nobody talks about it, though. Word surface is never used in the conversation. So all this conversation about these experiments, and all of them involve surfaces, and not one other person I've ever heard besides me brings up the subject that what do they have in common? Surfaces. Surfaces are complex.
They made out and they never fought again, and everybody's happy to this day because they don't do physics. Again, like Max Born says, it's become more and more abstract. Okay? So what do we have here? Double slit, the physical interpretation. I'm going to give you a physical interpretation for the slit experiment. Okay, so what is it?
Yeah, so his interpretation is these wacky rope things, and it doesn't make any sense. I don't even know how you slide the slit. Like, say you had the light on and you slid the slits in. What happens to all those ropes? Terrible mess.
Well, we have Mr. Francesco Grimaldi, 1665, and he wrote in his Physico Mathesiis de Lumine, and he said, look, when I run light through two tiny slits, I produce these fringes on the wall.
Alright, so it's obviously two different kinds of slits, though. So he's using a small aperture to send the light to another small aperture. So it's a different kind of two slit. It's really doing the single slit in the traditional way. The traditional way of doing the single slit and the double slit was to use, because they were using sunlight, was to first put the sunlight through a little aperture so you could have a beam of light, and then send that to your slit. So you could do the experiment in some kind of rational way that way. You got better results, let's put it that way. So essentially you're diffracting the light and then diffracting it a second time. But it's clearly different than the double slit. He's doing a double slit, but it's not a double slit in the sense they're not side by side.
He says that's so strange because, I can't understand how this works. We come to 1801, Thomas Young, And specifically, he ran an experiment in which he reproduced Grimaldi's results, but more importantly, he reproduced.
So again, it's not that he's reproducing Rinaldi's results because he's doing it quite different. But yes, I mean, it says right here, the breadth of a hair, of the hair, distance of the hair from the aperture. So I mean, he's doing this single hair experiment also, and so it's very clearly this is something Newton had already done. So 200 years earlier, well, 150 years earlier.
Experiment done by Newton. Newton had read of Grimaldi's accomplishments, and he went in there and he took one of his hairs. I think it was one of his hairs. He did a hair experiment. He pulled his hair out and he said, let's see, what does it do with the hair? Because Grimaldi had done it with two slits. He ran light through two slits and produced interference fringes on the wall. And he says, what if I put a hair? What would happen then? So Newton did it with a hair, and he produced fringes as well. And so Thomas Young comes 200 years later, 150, and he says, I'm going to try this. Let's see what happens. He did it with...
So totally unremarkable in that sense. And the only thing that is remarkable about the two-slit experiment is the fact that it does create two patterns that no one talks about. I mean, there's an envelope of a certain shape, and then there's the pattern inside the envelope. And nobody deals with that in terms of an explanation, because it doesn't fit water waves. Water waves don't do that.
And he also did it with a wire. And this is his third experiment. And he did it with a human hair. And he measured the width of the hair. He made all these calculations. And yeah, effectively, you can produce this effect, this so-called slit experiment, with a hair. Somehow that got buried in history until Bill Gates dug it back up again, because nobody done it with a hair, which is much easier to do with a hair than it is to do with...
It probably should have been part of the conversation, and again, it sort of illustrates the point that it's surfaces that are causing the effect. But yes, I mean, this is all omitted from conventional physics. When they tell you the history, they make up a completely fake history, where they, like, again, I don't even know why Thomas Young is even in the history books, because he didn't do anything remarkable. He didn't do anything that wasn't already pre-discovered 150 years earlier.
You got to get those slits not only very finely cut, they have to be very thin, but you have to have them very close together. Thomas Young tried to do. He says, I'm going to try.
And again, 1801. So it took them until 1930 to contrive quantum mechanics, wave-particle duality, as an explanation for something that happened 130 years ago. And that's just a regurgitation of what happened 150 years before that. So you're talking 300 dead years of no rational explanation, because no one knew what a surface was, in my opinion. No one thought about it.
Experiment Newton did. And he said he also reproduced fringes on the wall. And in order for you to understand that, if you have a single slit and you run light through it, it's like shining light through, maybe the keyhole. Light shines in there, just opens up and illuminates whatever the wall, whatever's out there, right? It just kind of opens up. And that's what you see with a single slit. But you can't do that with like a needle or a hair or a wire, because the light is blocked by the wires.
So what he just said didn't make much sense, right? Because a single slit isn't just opening the door. The single slit creates the pattern. So again, that doesn't make much sense.
So now you can't have that same situation. So it's a little different. It's like, is the half...
So again, it's not a little different, when you think about it. So the single slit is two surfaces. The single impediment is two surfaces. And then the double slit would be four surfaces. So all you're doing is changing the number of surfaces.
The glass half full or half empty, that kind of situation. Is it the same thing to run light through a slit than it is to run it, against a needle or a wire or a hair and have light go around it? Okay? And that's what we're looking at, that comparison. Okay, so I decided to repeat Mr. Young's experiment, and I did it with a hair. I did it with a needle. So here you can see on the left-hand side, you'll see the needle stuck to a cord.
Right. This has been done by lots of people, so not, yes, it works. It's not the double slit pattern, though. It's the single slit pattern.
shine a laser pointer at it. You can see the laser hitting the needle on the right-hand side. And at the far end of the wall, you can see that there's a light. You see that there, right? When you walk all the way up there, you see it. That's what you will find. You will find interference fringes. You see all these fringes extending out from the center plane.
And it's the same proportion with the needle. So you have 3 fringes essentially are occupied by the center. So you're not seeing the middle is really a dead spot, but it's gotten overwhelmed by the amount of light that's bending into it. And so it's 3 fringes worth.
And that's what we have to explain.
It's an off and 2 ons.
How does Mother Nature produce that effect? Okay. And so how do they explain it? Well, here's the way we explain it today. They say, well, imagine that light is made of particles. Okay. The particles go out and hit the side.
So obviously they don't explain it that way. So this is where, you know, it starts off pretty good, but then he does a really bad paraphrase of conventional physics' theory, because they clearly, first off, they aren't particle people. All right, I mean, conventional physics is clearly a wave theory to explain the double slit. There's no conventional physicist who ever talks about it in terms of particles. They always talk about it in terms of their waves or wavicles at best. So this is just a huge mischaracterization of the argument. I mean, if Bill Gates wants to argue particle physics, come to me, okay? Because I'll explain how particles do it.
Of the window of the slit, and they bounce inwards, and they interfere with the other ball that's hitting the other frame. You know, they meet somewhere on the screen, and where they meet with the same frequency, with the same phase, they have...
So again, there's no phase in this description. There's nothing in this illustration that shows any of that kind of interference. And again, a true particle theory, there's no such thing as interference. There's just an angle, period. That's all there is. An angle of deflection. And you can have double the angle, or triple the angle, or quadruple the angle. But it's just about the same angle. That's where all the fringes are. They're just a multiple of the same angle.
And when they don't meet, you know, when they're out of phase, well, they have a dark band. That's how it's explained today. But what if we replace that double slit with a needle? In other words, what if we take the piece on the top and the piece on the bottom, and just leave the center point, and you produce interference fringes anyways? That ball would have nothing again.
So he's a false premise that they're arguing that it's deflecting off of a surface like that. And the real argument would be is it's interfering with the surface. And so clearly they would argue that the stuff hitting the inside would be the same as the stuff hitting the outside surface in terms of its ability to be deflected. So just he's arguing as a straw man argument.
Bounce. That's the problem. And here it is. Let's remove them. I'm going to remove them. 1 and 2. I remove them. Now what is it going to bounce against? See the problem? The problem is the light should go straight forward. It should never hit anything. There's no bouncing. And so now we have a problem, because now we can't explain what particles. Why is this important? Because
nobody who's deep into this stuff, I mean, I speculated about stuff like that when I first saw the experiment, but you know, once you start researching it, there's no way it's bouncing like that.
Albert Einstein and Mr. Niels Bohr, and they debated in 1927 at the 5th Solid Conference, and they debated for hours in just what I showed a minute ago. They said, oh yeah, we can just run the ball against the frame of the slit and it bounces inward. Very simple, right? And it turns out that you can't do that with a needle, or what I call the needle experiment, or you can call it the wire experiment.
Yeah, so that would there was at that conference there was a trivial conversation about the 2-slit experiment. It clearly wasn't a deep conversation or a knowledgeable one. So it was a casual conversation about what possible explanations could exist. And again, this is before they had fully developed their wavicle bullshit. And so clearly they do not perceive photons as being corpuscles. They obviously are some kind of thing that goes through both slits and turns into some other kind of function and then resolves itself back into a hole again, or creates a multiverse. So their theory is wacky, but it's not this. I mean, this is kind of unfair. You know, if somebody says something and then 10 years later, you know, they have a fully developed theory, you're going to sit there and take the embryo and say that you're going to keep just showing the embryo and say, no, you said you have this. When, no, they have something much more developed as a theory.
This hair experiment, whatever you want to call it, if you put a hair there, then it's got nothing to bounce against, okay? And there it is. We remove it, and it's got nothing to bounce against. So now we have a problem because we can't do it with particles, and I'm going to show in a second that we can't do it also with...
So he says you can't do it with particles. I think, of course, you can. You know, if you understand what they are, photons against electrons, that you can do.
Okay. So let's see if we can do it now with waves. Well, again, we have the same problem. Why? Because a wave is a one-directional, mechanism. The wave comes out of the atom and should go straight, just like a particle. So what do? Why does the wave come inwards? Well, this is the explanation that you get. The wave, when it hits something, it kind of turns into a particle.
That's not what they say. So again, it's exactly the opposite. They say it's a particle going in, and it turns into a wave. So he's got that exactly backwards. And clearly they argue that it's like the mechanics of friction, that somehow the photon can't get around the thing and it gets bowed by the interaction and somehow turns into a round wave.
It collapses, the wave function collapses into a particle. Whatever that means to you, that's what it does, okay? But what's the point? The point is that they explain this with waves, with water waves. They say, look, if you want to understand this, it's very easy. Just imagine water going through a little slit, and it'll open up. And if it hits water coming from another slit, well, they'll interfere with each other because water goes outwards. You see, here we have two slits, slit 1 and slit 2, okay? If you throw two...
Right, so there's absolutely nothing particle-like at all about this analogy. So clearly their analogy doesn't have any form of particle. A single photon can't do all of this, right? And we know that single photons, they're accepting that a single photon is creating the phenomenon. Single photons do all of that, okay, in secret, and then land at a probabilistic location. So if there's a 40% chance here, and 40 here, and 20 here, and 10 here, that kind of thing. And so there's just a probability after it does this stuff of it landing in a certain location. So even by Feynman's logic, there's still some secret. This is the calculation made, is in this field of mush, and every single individual photon does that. So to argue that they're arguing particle physics is just lying. Okay, it's sort of slandering particle physics by saying they're describing particle physics, because clearly nothing they're illustrating has anything to do with particles.
These ripples will expand, and the ripples from this guy will interfere with the ripples of that guy. That's what that blue image is showing. And what you see at the end are the interference fringes. You can see light, in this case red, red, black, red, black, red, black. What is the problem? With a single slit.
So see, at least he's got the right the illustration of the double slit. Unfortunately, you can't see that because I don't show. You can see it, it's still there. Okay, so you got the right pattern here. You got the clump in the center with the bars. So that's what the envelope. That's the envelope. Nobody explains the envelope, the cause of the envelope. The wave theory doesn't account for that two pattern aspect at all. It's not evidence for, it's evidence against wave theory.
Water goes out of the slit. It just goes outwards. This is for water, okay? And here you see they've done it with a single slit. This is water. This is...
So, and again, obviously water's a bunch of molecules, a bunch of little things tied to each other, and again, it's the friction that caused the bowing or the waves. So obviously the water has adhesion, the friction with the surfaces drags the water, slows it down, and so the water in the middle is going faster, so the water bows. And there's no reason to think photons do anything like that.
Of a water tank that is vibrating. So the water comes...
Single photons.
Up, and as you can see, it just goes outwards. Here you see another one. The bottom one is dynamic. and they widen the slit. And you can see it just produces different kinds of waves, but they're always outward going. They never interfere with each other. So what is the problem? The problem is that they do it with waves.
Well, they can make them interfere by agitating the water at a higher frequency, therefore causing interference in the water going in. So the input water's already got interference in it.
I see. There is no such physical object as a wave. A wave is a constant. It's just something.
So again, here you are, 1 minute you're saying they're a particle theory, then you concede that there's nothing the particle-like at all in this illustration. There's nothing about this that looks anything like a particle. It has no corpuscular essence. It's completely not. It's pressure in two different fields. It just has no. There's no way to call this particle physics.
Something that vibrates, whatever a wave is. And this is the typical pictorial representation of a wave. The top one is the dynamic version, the bottom one is a static version. Essentially, a wave, or the electromagnetic wave, is made out of two fields. One is the electric field, the other one is the magnetic field. We get that from Mr. Maxwell. They move forward, they only move in one direction. This is one of the problems with it. Okay, this is what they say light is.
Right, but it's also that wide enough for a single photon to hit a needle and create two waves that interfere with each other. Again, we're back to the single photon argument. Now, I don't know if the single photon was ever shot at a needle or a hair, but that would also be interesting, right? And to see if you get the pattern. I think it's intuitive to say, yes, you would get the same pattern. It's consistent with the evidence to think so anyway, to have every reason to believe. And again, it just doesn't make much sense, because somehow this thing that's supposed to be just a little, little bit of pressure in some sort of field, somehow it's a very big thing. Except when it lands somewhere, then it's a little tiny thing that just hits electrons. Little tiny thing. It doesn't hit 5 electrons or 40 electrons. No, it just hits one little electron. So how does this big thing get so frickin' small?
And this does not actually behave very much like water, because water does not really behave exactly like what they're saying light does or a transverse wave does, okay? So keep that in mind. Okay.
So now, so there's, there might be some point in playing some of this rope crap, but it's just so silly. I mean, just coming up with another more complex than the things themselves. So, he's claiming that every atom is connected to every other atom in the universe with a rope like this. And that somehow twisting the rope is a photon moving, when that doesn't even work.
Here we're saying that what they've been looking at all these years is a rope that interconnects any two atoms in the universe. And you can see they're very similar. It's the famous wave that they always give you as a pictorial representation is nothing more than a cross-section of a rope. That's essentially what a wave is. There are differences. The electromagnetic rope is structurally wavy, whereas the electromagnetic wave is a dynamically generated wavy thing. A rope is taut, so it's stretched straight. It's like if you have a highway. It's straight. Cars can only go straight along that highway because the highway is straight. The question.
Yes. It doesn't really, yes, and just unimaginable amounts of problems in terms of how anything could ever interact in the universe without all these ropes getting tangled all over the place. Just can't make any sense out of it.
With the wave, the electromagnetic wave, be straight, why doesn't it just wiggle and go around? And it doesn't. It's supposed to go straight, because if you shine a light on a mirror or whatever, you see that it's completely straight.
Yeah, their theory is stupid, okay, that to think that everything is doing this sinusoidal crap in a medium. Again, a rope is a medium. The rules of its movement are dictated by the tension in the rope, the connection that all the little fibers have to each other. Those are the things causing the effect. There's no reason to think photons are connected to anything. They don't demonstrate any connection.
That for yourself. It does travel in a straight line. And you're saying, well, if it's a wave, it's something coming out of the atom, why doesn't it just wiggle and go anywhere it wants? Why does it go exactly straight? The torsion also can only travel rectilinearly along, a rope. So you can show this in your home with your grandmother's Lowe's.
So anyway, so this idea of twisting the rope, torsion, well, that also makes the rope longer and shorter, and so then you're causing all kinds of distance problems that there's no evidence of, faster and slower light, and all that crap. So anyway, like I said, I really don't want to play the rope theory, but it's, it's just way too complex and elemental answer. More complex than the things it's connected to. Just doesn't make any sense theoretically. Alright, so that's probably enough of a video. So hopefully, I mean, at least the sound's good, so at least it's picking up the mic right. It's doing everything else shitty. I mean, it's not that terrible, but it's pretty bad. It's bad frame rate. So I got to find a way to fix that. I mean, it's a, it's a computer that's made to be light. It's only got the half card, so I can't put a full video card in it. But it's like an i7, processor, 4 gigabytes of memory, and it's got like a 1 gigabyte on the video card I put in. So it should be, I mean, it should have 1 megabyte, gigabyte, or whatever. I can't remember what you count memory in megabytes. Gigabytes? I forget already. Anyway, it's not that bad a video card for a half card. I think it's a, let's see, what is it? Yeah, GeForce 8400 GS. I mean, the reason I'm using it is because it has the HDMI port, which, works with this monitor. It's my other monitor, the HDMI port broke. So, and if I use the composite on this monitor, it's shifted about, 4 degrees to one side, and it won't unshift. Anyway, it's always something, So I gotta come up with some solution. So I'll work on it. So sorry about the shitty frame rate. And eventually I'll either fix it or I won't. I mean, I want something that works better for live rooms. And you can't do this in the live rooms. But anyway, working on it. So yes, again, I'll solicit if somebody wishes to have a conversation live, I wish to defend conventional physics. I would appreciate the opportunity to have you answer some of my questions. And you can ask me some. Or if, video exchanges. I don't see why nobody's capable of making any of those. But that might be a good idea. I'll critique your crap, you critique mine, something like that. Yeah, makes sense to me. And such. I guess that's it. I mean, I am offering $3,000 prize for contest. There's a contest video. Links below somewhere, one of the playlists. And only, it's less than 10 people have entered. It's just hilarious. You're giving away $3,000 and 10 people enter. But whatever. It's the way the internet works nowadays. It's really hard to get any traction in this mud. So anyway, till the next time. And such. So let's see how this Matthew Orman, he actually calls something the Orman force. So he's, I guess he's claiming there's some other force to be accounted for. So I haven't figured out everything he's talking about. But like I said, the one thing I did figure out is that he's not correctly understanding B fields. B fields have to be dipole fields. And you can introduce a magnet in a way that creates kind of a primarily just a monopole. And if you do that, you can't use the same dipole mathematics. You can't have the same expectation when you have secreted one of the poles in kind of an isolated way. And it's quite obvious that when you have a very big magnet, very thin, with north and south, clearly you have a whole area where there's no influence of the south pole of the magnet, or vice versa, and you can't use the same. You can't treat it as if it was a dipole when you've created a bizarre shaped magnet. Okay, something like that anyway. So, till next time and such. Yeah, that's enough. It mostly worked. There's lots of little bugs in this thing though. I did notice. It's like the background does some glitchy stuff. It wasn't doing before. I mean, the OBS software's, gotten all glitchy. Yeah, right now I can't scroll. But the background's a little friggin' weird. This is black lines. So, it's just glitchy stuff. The draft physics thing is popping up and down. Shouldn't be doing that. It's just always something. Just irritating. So I don't know whether that's the new video card or whether that's the new version of Linux. I don't know. Well, just see if I can resolve these irritating little issues. So anyway, till next time.